Hey, Legal Rebels, this is Tom Martin. I'm the founder of LawDroid, and this is my podcast, LawDroid Manifesto, where I interview legal innovators about how they do what they do. In this episode, I interview Martin Ertl, CEO of Recital, whose journey from physics to legal tech is revolutionizing how lawyers manage contracts by working with, not against, their existing work habits. Welcome to the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. I'm Tom Martin, your host, and I'm very excited today to have a fellow Vancouverite with me, Martin Ertl, who is also the CEO of Recital, and we're going to learn a ton about that. But first off, Martin, if you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you're up to now.
Tom, thanks so much for having me. It's really good to see you here and good to be here with you. By way of introduction, I happen to be an attorney by background, but I went down the entrepreneurial path and ultimately the legal technology path, starting fairly on in my career, and that's what I've been working up until now.
Yeah, and I have to say that, you have definitely been early to the party, earlier than a lot of us, I would say, especially like the newcomers with AI to the whole software side of it. And I'm really looking forward to learning more about how you did that.
I'm looking forward to talking about it. You're making me feel old.
No, well, look, I got some years on you. So, but I do remember like looking back a little bit because I moved up to Vancouver about 12 years ago. And, I found that my common thread was having like a tech focus on the law. And so put Vancouver legal hackers together and early on met you. And you were so generous to meet me for coffee at, in Gastown.
I
Um,
remember that.
yeah. And it's like, didn't know me from Adam, but you're kind enough to meet with me and we talk shop.
Absolutely. That you're right. That does go back a ways and long before what you've been working on with LawDroid and what I'm working on now with Recital. I think that was back in the day when I was still working on contractually my previous company. And it might have been around the point where we'd been acquired by Coupa Software.
Yeah. I think it was just around that moment.
Yeah.
Um, so just a quick thank you for that. But now let's like rewind really quickly to the origin story. Did you grow up in Vancouver?
No, I actually was born in Montreal and grew up in Montreal till I was about 10 years old. Something that sometimes surprises people is French is actually my native language. I didn't learn to speak English until I was about 10. I learned it a little bit because my family lived in Toronto a few months before we moved out to Vancouver, but it's when I moved out to Vancouver that I actually really learned English. So yeah, my mom's family is all from Quebec, and my dad's family is all from Germany.
So about how old were you when you moved out to British Columbia?
About 10 years old. So I finished
And
elementary. I finished elementary school here in Vancouver. Went to high school here in Vancouver, and then went to UBC, the University of British Columbia, for my undergraduate degree.
and what was that environment growing up in Quebec? Like what was your mom and dad doing at the time?
My mom was a radiologist, and my dad worked in the hospitality industry. I have to say, because I left Montreal when I was pretty young, I went back later to Montreal to attend law school at McGill, but my memories from being a young boy in Montreal are pretty vague and much more oriented towards family memories than any
Hmm.
sense of what was really going on in Quebec society at the time.
Right.
I will date myself a little bit and say that it was a tumultuous time in general in the early 70s, mid 70s in Quebec for a whole bunch of political reasons, but I did not have any sense of that. I learned, I think, more about that as an adult than childhood memories.
Well, for the Americans watching, um, I mean, what you're referring to is like there was like a movement at some point to break off from the rest of Canada, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So I was
Yeah.
actually born in October. I will come out and tell you how old I am. I was born in October 1970, which is known as the October Crisis in Quebec. There were two kidnappings by a group called the FLQ, that was advocating with violent means to get Quebec to separate. And it was the first time in Canada, I believe, that um, the effect, what is effectively martial law, was declared in certainly Montreal. And my memory is fading here, but I think it might have been even broader than just the Montreal area, meaning that the army was actually called in to police the city.
Wow. That's something we definitely don't think of. And when, well, speaking as with my American hat on, in terms of Canada, that, there is that history there.
Yeah, yes, there is, and as you indicated correctly as well, that was a time following that in the early '70s, leading up to 1976, when there was a first referendum in Quebec on the question of Quebec separating from Canada.
All right. Well, thank you for the history lesson. I just thought that, that some Americans might not be familiar with that. So we should bring it. We should.
There are probably many Canadians who aren't familiar with that time as well. Partly it's the passage of time, partly it was something that happened in Quebec, which is not necessarily as well known throughout the rest of Canada.
Let's just say you were born in interesting times, and
Correct.
and and so thereafter you moved to British Columbia and into Vancouver and
That's right.
finished up school here, and then you went to UBC to major in physics, right?
Well, yes, that is what I ended up doing. My intent was to do science initially, to do a year of science, and then go into engineering. I was actually accepted directly into engineering, which was a somewhat difficult thing back in those days. But I'd gotten advice from at least one mentor that doing a year of science would help me see the relationship better between science and engineering. So that idea appealed to me, and I did that. But then, for a variety of reasons, decided I didn't necessarily see myself as being an engineer down the road. But I loved physics, I loved math. So I made a decision to stick with that path, with the view that I would probably do some other professional degree after. And what I had in mind at the time was an MBA, a business degree. Law was not yet at all on my horizons at that point in time.
Well, okay, so before we get to the law part of it, I want to dig deeper into that. So I would imagine that some of the science slash math influence was from your mom.
Yeah, I think that's probably right.
And were there any experiences that kind of, inculcated that or amplified that? Was there, I don't know, a math teacher that was encouraging, or were there anything like that, early influences along those lines?
There were, but I have to say my interest in science and in math, I think, was there from the time I was born, even if I didn't necessarily realize it right away. So those were always my favorite subjects in school: science and math, and ultimately physics and math. I did have some wonderful teachers, even if I think back to elementary school, and certainly in high school, who encouraged me academically and encouraged my curiosity, and certainly were really supportive. And yeah, quite a few teachers I remember talking to about what to pursue in terms of university studies and longer term career.
And I think that's certainly a commonality in people that do what we do, or people that are innovators or innovative, because they have that inner sense of curiosity. And it's something that I think needs to be encouraged when you're young, because the opposite could definitely happen, where people are like, well, you're not going to make money doing that, or
That's right.
where's the dollar value in that?
Artists starve, lawyers drive nice cars.
So is that how it went? So okay,
I'm
then
completely joking about that. That's not a reflection of my thoughts. I agree entirely with you about the importance of curiosity and nurturing creativity and curiosity before kids lose some of that as they learn to adapt to society and how schooling can work to shape the direction of our lives.
well, I'm also curious before we move on a step is you know, you said your dad was involved in the hospitality business. So I imagine that you had some exposure to that too. And like, was there anything like, do you have any memory that of like a lesson learned or like some priority that he instilled in you from that experience or?
So much about that. I think it was interesting to have him in that profession, that business, because every once in a while he got to take free trips. So to Germany, to Hong Kong, as actually was probably one of the more exotic and memorable trips. So at the time, he was the general manager of a flight kitchen at Vancouver International Airport. One of his customers was Cathay Pacific. So we got a wonderful trip to Hong Kong.
That's pretty nice.
Yeah.
Getting to
Yeah. So
see
I
the
think
world.
I was a young, yeah, I was a young teenager at the time. So definitely a very different experience than my limited travel up to that point in Canada. And I suppose to some extent to Europe.
And you were what, about 13, 14 at the time or?
Yeah, that's, I think 14. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when I was around that age, my dad took me to Europe and some of Eastern Europe actually at the time, which was
Oh, wow.
a little like edgy going there in the before the wall came down. Um, but I'm a true believer that those early experiences with travel, international travel, it opens up, you know, vistas and opportunities and well, the opportunities that will come later because you're thinking in that way of in an expansive way.
Yeah, more global, experiencing other cultures, other languages, seeing that, you know, a city in North America can look very different than a city in Europe or a city in Asia. I think just those different perspectives that the world is different. It's not the same unified experience that we have living in Canada or the United States.
Definitely. It is very different in different parts of the world. So you come back, then you go through, you get your degree, and do you immediately go into law school or do you pause before then? And by the way, McGill, not too shabby.
Yeah,
You know, very
it's a beautiful school, yeah, and a wonderful city to be going to university in. Very cosmopolitan, multicultural, great food. The weather can get a bit difficult, especially in the winter time. I think the year I arrived in Montreal for my first year of law school, the temperatures hit minus 40 degrees Celsius in November. And I'll leave it to you to translate Celsius to Fahrenheit, but I think it's really cold. That would be a,
damn cold.
would be a short summary. Back to your question about how I went from undergrad, where yeah, I graduated in physics from UBC. The decision to go to law school came out of my involvement at UBC in student government. So I was
Okay.
elected initially vice president and then elected president of the student society at UBC. And UBC is, people may know, is one of the largest universities, not just in Canada, but in North America and the world. And in terms of the student society, it's somewhat unique even across North America in that it not only collects membership fees, but it has significant commercial operations. So part of the experience of being president of the student body was not only the advocacy role that comes with that and the leadership role that comes with that, but also a very early experience with leading an actual organization with a large budget north of 8 figures. Sorry, I'm probably north of 7 figures is what I want to say. And with a large professional staff, large student workforce in addition to that. And along with that comes various kinds of legal issues, business issues. So that's actually the experience that got me really interested in how we govern ourselves. And I mean that at the broadest level of how society governs itself, but also how we create organizations, how we govern, how we manage organizations. And yes, also got me very interested in the legal side of things, because there was not just a lot of legal commercial issues to deal with, but we had a number of legal disagreements with the university as well, which were at the time certainly very interesting and very absorbing. And with the benefit of hindsight, I see a lot of value in having been able to learn about and to deal with those issues. It is what fostered my interest in law and going to law school. Though I have to say, I didn't necessarily go to law school to become a lawyer. I went to law school, and here I got some wonderful advice from a senior lawyer at the time, that it would provide lots of options. I could, of course, be a practicing lawyer if I wanted to. I could use it as a background for business, and I could use it as a background for public service or government. And I like options. I understand the financial value of options, but I also my mindset is all about expanding the pool of options. And I think that's a lot of what entrepreneurship is about. So off I went to law school, changing my mind from a few years earlier, where I was probably more interested in going to business school.
Okay, like that definitely helps me to understand that transition. Yeah, I'm a big fan of optionality as well, because I think the more degrees of freedom you have, the more interesting life can be, and
Yeah,
you get to choose, right?
yeah,
It's always nice to be in a position to be able to choose.
I
Um,
agree.
so okay, so like I would think that if I put myself in your shoes back then, it might even be a political career, because you're, having all this great experience running what essentially is like a small city with all of these different issues, that like labor issues and things that come up. Was that something that you're thinking about?
I definitely did. I thought that seriously as potentially one of my paths. That has turned out not to be the case, and I think I decided at some point fairly early in my career that there's more things that appeal to me in working in the private sector than working in politics. Part of that is definitely private, around privacy, and around, again, around freedom to be able to be who you are, and to choose what you want to do. And some of it is genuinely that as a private citizen working in the private sector, you can make things happen quickly. You can create things that don't exist. And so there's a lot of work around that in working with government institutions. They are rightly oriented towards stability in the long term. There's a lot of great work that folks in our public service and in government leadership do to make sure that society, government institutions evolve with the times. But that's naturally and rightly a slower process. I'm more interested in making things happen, in creating new things, taking risks. And I think the place for that is ultimately as an entrepreneur.
So let's take that step. So you go to law school with that in mind, and then you come out of that, and you do a couple of, like, what would be considered traditional things. You work for a law firm, and then after that is general counsel, so that you're already like, going off to a world that's, you know not the typical like lockstep progressing towards partner path. And then from working as general counsel, you go into a software company at that point. Is that right?
There's a little bit more in between.
Okay.
So one of the issues is that once I got into law school, I stopped thinking about what I wanted to do next. So I had this great idea that I'm going to law school to preserve options, right? To create options. But I have enough self-awareness to realize that I really should have kept exploring that through law school. So by not doing that, I ended up on the natural path that most of my classmates were on, which is you want to find a position with a law firm, you want to be hired on as an associate, and yes, ultimately you want to become a partner at that law firm. So that is the path coming out of law school that I ended up on, which I deeply appreciate today for a whole bunch of reasons. But it took me a few years of practice within a law firm environment to remind myself this wasn't actually why I went to law school. Many things about this that I love my colleagues, legal problems, and I was notionally part of the litigation group with primarily an administrative law practice. The legal problems are intellectually challenging and interesting and all of that, but I like building things, and I mean that not necessarily not just in the sense of physical things, but building products, building organizations. Without any great, well thought out plan, and there was a group of friends who I knew from my undergraduate days at UBC who were at similar points in their lives, and we came together around an idea that the main founder at the time had to build cloud software. This is before cloud software actually existed, but that's the name we would use today for the shipping industry. So we had kind of all the key roles covered. You're absolutely right. My role initially was as general counsel, that morphed over time into other roles around heading up professional services and strategy and all of that. But yeah, that's how that happened, and that's what put me on the path that I've stayed on, which is entrepreneurship, with a transition through starting a company and being general counsel for that company.
Okay, I get it. When you worked as general counsel there, like it was really a mind expander. It was an eye opener to all of the possibilities beyond just the narrow practice of law and
Exactly.
yeah, building. So what did you do with that notion of building after that?
Well, that led to my second startup, which is very relevant to what I'm still working on today. That second startup was called Contractually. And one way to think about it is it was an early contract management system in the cloud, and very specifically contract collaboration in the cloud. And that came out of my experience at the first company where I was general counsel. And that company was serving some of the world's largest companies at the time, Fortune 10 energy companies. And I was the one who was structuring and negotiating our contracts with these companies. And part of that experience is you're dealing with multiple stakeholders, and it's not just in-house counsel, it's procurement, it's the business champion, sometimes it's IT, compliance, all of that. So relatively complex agreements, at a time when email had come into the world, and Microsoft Word had come into the world. And so it was standard practice to email drafts back and forth.
And just for the audience, contractually started in 2010. So there had been the email around for for quite some
No,
time.
this was the earlier company, which started around 2000.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, that company was called Navric. So you're right, at that point, absolutely, email was in place, but it was only a few years old. So I actually started my legal practice at a time when I was a summer student. Email was just coming in that summer at the law firm I was at. So this was still a time when many senior lawyers would have their assistants print out their emails to be put on their message spike. The
Right.
lawyer would dictate a response to the email, and the assistant would type out the response to the email.
And there used to be brouhahas with ethics of actually inputting stuff into an email client and whether or not that
Absolutely.
was,
Secure and
yeah,
privileged, and yeah, all of that. All of that. How far we've come. Though that
yeah,
question still gets asked, it just gets asked in other contexts now.
right. Because it's just, yeah, yeah. Don't get me started on that. But
Yeah.
and also it's kind of strange. We've come full circle in a way in terms of that workflow that you described, because I know a lot of people, including myself, that are dictating to an AI that's actually
Yes.
transcribing it and then doing it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But I love that experience because, it's very practical. Like you were working in that world, you were working with contracts. These were challenges that you yourself were facing. And then you took all of that and then, obviously a passion for applying technology to this stuff to make your life easier and then in turn able to make other people's lives easier.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I've always been a big believer in the value that lawyers provide, and I still believe that even in the age of AI. I think historically we haven't, as lawyers, been able to provide as much value as we could because there's a lot of work that we do as lawyers that should be done by software, by technology. So that's one big driver for me is to build products that allow lawyers to be their best selves, and part of that is provide the most value possible to their clients, whether that's in private practice or to their company if they're corporate counsel.
And so one thing I just want to make a mental footnote to come back to ask you about, because I really do love your approach, which I think is different in that you're not putting the technology front and center. You're putting the actual helping lawyers do their jobs better first. And for anyone who's listening to this, you really should check out Recital because, and we'll talk about it later, but it really has that focus on amplifying what you could do, augmenting your work rather than just like AI, it's shiny. Um, but one question I want to go back to, and I can't believe I didn't ask you this. Did you play around with computers at all when you're younger? Like, did you have like a Commodore 64 or what
I
was
had an Apple IIc.
it? Cool.
So yes, I did, and I did some very light coding then, but nothing extensive. But yeah, I learned early on the power of software applications to make a whole bunch of things faster, more automated. Um, One of the things I did in high school is I was one of the managers for the football team. I not only recorded the games on video, but also took statistics for the game. And so I learned to use a spreadsheet, VisiCalc, at a very early age, just to keep track of those statistics.
Wow, Martin, you were moneyballing it before Moneyball was a thing.
Hmm.
Yeah, cool. I think that also that early exposure to technology, computers like that, just makes you think about, how can we use this to solve these other problems.
Yeah.
So, all right, fast forward back. We're going back and forth, but now back to contractually. What was that experience like?
Hard, rewarding. We took some early steps towards solving many of the problems that exist in the process of negotiating contracts. So the initial vision for contractually was to move the process of emailing contract drafts back and forth to the cloud with a collaborative online editor. Think a little bit like Google Docs, but
Okay.
with all the privacy and confidentiality features that you need during a contract negotiation process. this was inspired a lot by my work at the previous company where I was general counsel, where I was handling these negotiations with large companies with multiple stakeholders, emails with drafts flying back and forth, people working on the wrong draft, and myself as the kind of the orchestrator of the negotiations, having to manually reconcile one person's changes with another person's changes, and so on and so on and so on. So part of the vision for contractually was to eliminate all of that and to make sure that everybody always knew which version they were on and that they were working on the right version in terms of edits and comments and so forth. Where we got traction, one key place that we got traction was with procurement departments. By definition, procurement departments are in large companies, and they're often dealing with vendor contracts from their own templates. So contractually was actually well suited to that use case because there was typically not necessarily a lot of negotiation back and forth with vendors, but there was some light editing, and then you could control which fields and clauses the other party could edit. And that was very appealing from the procurement department's perspective. Interestingly, it was also very appealing to many vendors because it meant that they could get their contract signed faster, and contractually had built-in electronic signatures, which also means that the vendors could get paid faster. That was the driver for vendors. So that put us on the radar of Coupa Software, which is now known as a leader or the leader in spend management software, where contracts and the contracting process is a key part of dealing with sourcing and procurement. They had some of those capabilities, but they had some gaps in that area where there was a really good fit for what contractually had built.
Let's unpack contractually a little bit because, well, first off, was there anything in particular, like, I guess the strongest thing you could point to from your experience with Navarric that mapped over to contractually? Like, was there an insight or like something that you thought, well, this is something that we really needed to tackle? Was it versioning? Was it, yeah?
Yeah, it was versioning, making sure that you're always working on the most up-to-date version, that there's no confusion for anyone as to what is the right version to be working on. Now, there's a whole bunch of other things that go around that problem. So one is getting contracts approved and signed ultimately. And another key piece at that point was some automation around the contract authoring process. If you're working with templates, being able to populate those templates from an application like Salesforce, for example, or for that matter, from any other business application where you have data. So that's what we were building. This is directly related to what we'll talk about in a few minutes, I think, with Recital, which has a completely different approach to all of this. So one takeaway from that whole experience is there's a lot that can be done around contract automation and around supporting lawyers with authoring and negotiations and workflow and signatures and all of that. But one key takeaway for me, for my co-founder, was when you try to move lawyers off of Word and email, you're in for a lot of friction and pain as an organization.
It's a bit of a third rail, isn't it?
I won't spoil what we'll talk about a little bit later, but that was definitely something that we took away from that experience. And of course, during our time at Coupa, we had some functionality to integrate directly with Word even before we were acquired by Coupa, but that became a key product priority to make sure that we could support negotiators, not just in procurement, but negotiators who are lawyers and who, for some very good reasons, do need to work in Microsoft Word and do need to be able to email Word documents back and forth for negotiations.
So one thing I want to touch on is I've been doing this a lot lately, making like this distinction between use cases, the technical how aspect of software and the business need, the actual why. Why are we doing this in the first place? Because there's so many use cases that theoretically could apply. Now, the versioning and that stuff, that's great from a technical standpoint, but you've already touched on the business need, but I just want to emphasize it. And the business need was really in what the feedback you're getting from the requisition people and the vendors that were dealing with them, which was getting signed faster, getting paid faster. Did it ever occur that did it ever happen that a vendor actually like referred you to a company so that they could get paid faster?
I don't recall that. I don't recall that.
But
That
at the
would,
same,
but that, yeah, it's a great question.
yeah, I mean, it's just it opens up so many like when we understand the business need, like there's other opportunities with that may not have come up at the
Encourage
beginning.
us.
Yeah, but um, so in the companies that were doing requisitions, this was satisfying their business need of, and you fill in the blank there. What was it actually solving for them?
Well, so for the buying company,
Yeah,
they need to have a contract in place with vendors to be clear about what they're buying. So let's say they're buying services, consulting services of some kind. They need to have a contract that sets out those services, sets out the payment amount, sets out the payment terms, covers risk in various forms. So around limitations of liability, indemnities, all the lovely things that lawyers always indicate are very important. They need to have that in writing. And they may also need to have some of that data flow into other applications as well, like financial applications. And they, of course, logistically, they need to get that document filled out properly, sent to the vendor, and make sure the vendor signs and get that back and track that agreement, track when it might expire, track when it might renew, so they can make a decision about whether to renew and on what terms. So all those things are in a sense requirements of being in, not necessarily being in any business, but certainly being in a large business where you have legal and compliance requirements.
the experience with contractually, and then well, with contractually is like this practical thing of removing friction by having an ease with versioning and also, you know, speeding along the completion of these transactions. And then after that, I think another step when Coupa acquired contractually was adding on yet another friction remover, which was making this work within Word, right?
Correct.
So it's
Correct.
so it's just an interesting progression of like removing of friction step by step, which leads us to Recital, where I think you have done a fantastic job in removing even more friction. So like if you could share with everyone like what am I talking about and what have you accomplished with that?
Yeah, so at a high level, Recital is a simplified contract management and contract review solution. So one of the things we're really clear about, we're not an end-to-end contract lifecycle or CLM application, although we do solve many of the problems that CLMs happen to solve. One of the unique things about Recital that we've touched on a little bit is that it works directly in the tools that in-house counsel already use. So in particular, email, whether that's Outlook or Gmail, in particular, Microsoft Word, and all the common cloud storage providers. There's a roadmap and a larger vision about where we're taking all of that. But the idea is that you should be able to connect Recital to all sources of your contract documents and data. And that connection should happen with built-in connectors, not custom integration development. And then Recital simply goes to work. It finds contract documents on your SharePoint or your G Drive or your Box or Salesforce. It can distinguish between contracts and non-contracts. It can group together all versions of the same contract And I'm just going to pause there to emphasize that because that's a very, very challenging technical problem. Recital can actually find different drafts of the same contract and assemble a version history without manual work and without relying on codes in the subject line, without having a special email address that you need to use or anything like that. So this is again going back to solving the version control problem that we talked about earlier, but now doing it without moving in-house counsel off the tools they already use. They just keep using Word and Outlook or email or Gmail. That all they need to do is connect their email and their cloud storage to Recital, and Recital goes to work.
Okay, that's a lot. So let's unpack that too. One thing I like to do with my law students is when talking about big concepts like that, look at the before and then look at the after. And so you described the after. And I think what happens, and the reason why I like the before and after, is because I think a lot of people may be hearing you and go, yeah, of course it's going to work
Yeah.
that way, right? And when they have that attitude or they have that frame, then they don't appreciate like how amazing what you just described is. Because the before, and you correct me if I'm wrong, because you're the expert here, but the before picture of implementing a CLM type software is that there would actually be an extensive amount of time spent in organizing the files, putting with putting different versions of the same contract, like literally like manually putting them together in the same folders. There would have to be like all of this like prep work done, just like you prep a house to paint it. You'd have to do the taping and all this stuff, and that would take months, right? Sometimes many months.
6 to 12 months, maybe even years for some very large companies.
So they would have to have a runway of 6 to 12 months just to get everything, their documentation organized before they could even leverage a CLM software.
Yeah, it's so gathering all your historical contracts is one of the key steps for CLM implementation. There's some other key pieces that also take a lot of that time, but that's essentially a largely a manual process today of a company and its internal team, sometimes engaging professional services, actually identifying all the places within the company where contracts might be stored, gathering them all together in one place, deduplicating them. And now we're starting to get at this point where you've gathered all your historical contracts in one place. Now there's additional work, and now technology solutions, there are existing technology solutions that you can leverage to organize those contracts and to extract data, but that's still a heavy lift. And even when you then import the results of all of that to your CLM, there's typically more manual work to be done in the CLM to complete that process. So
Wow.
for example, one big thing is being able to map contract relationships. So being able to map a master service agreement with all of the statements of work and amendments for that master agreement. That is typically today manual work to do that. Recital has made that completely automatic.
Okay, let me just see that I understand that. What I think you're saying is that, hey, it's not just as simple as that there's contract A, or like let's say contract A1, and then there's contract A2. There's
Yeah,
actually a constellation of different support documents that are associated with contract A1, which might include an addendum, which might include like a scope of work or exhibits or what have you. And that in the before world, how would you even know that those are related unless you have like a human pair of eyes that has some experience putting all that together? Is that close?
it's manual data entry. So
Yeah.
if you have a CLM already, that's manual data entry.
Wow. Okay, so then if we zoom out and we look at some numbers representing time spent, what would the before and after on average look like?
For creating your repository. So as you said, as we talked about a bit earlier, it can range at the low end, probably 4 to 6 months, at the high end, 12 months plus, with the volume of work there, depending on the contract volume in the company and how well organized they are. So it can vary a lot, but it involves human effort on the part of the internal legal or legal operations team, and often needs to be supplemented with external professional services. So
That's
you're
the
looking,
before.
that's the before, and you're looking at the cost, the compensation costs of your internal team, and you're looking at the professional services costs in addition to that. So definitely in the tens of thousands of dollars and easily into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. This is all before you can actually start using your CLM. In addition to that, to the extent you leverage technology, the market rates right now are about $10 to $20 per document to extract data. And that involves a mix of technology and human effort.
Okay, what does the after look like if you used Recital?
Assuming you're using cloud storage, connect Recital to your cloud storage. It's a couple of button clicks. You don't even have to worry that your folders of contracts are organized on your cloud storage. As soon as you sign up, Recital connects, you connect Recital to your cloud storage, say SharePoint, and Recital immediately starts processing files in the folder that you've connected. You start to see results for contract records being detected, being deduplicated, signatures detected, and data extracted within a matter of minutes. So let's take a company that has about 5,000 historical contracts, which is, by the way, would be a large number of historical contracts, even for a fairly large company. We do that processing, if not entirely within 1 day, certainly within 3 days. If volume is higher than that, then obviously it can be a little bit longer, but the larger point here is we're talking about a matter of days, not a matter of months or years. And so the result here, the after, is that we have organized your historical contracts. When I say organized here, we've actually found all your signed contracts. We can distinguish between signed and unsigned contracts. We have mapped relationships. So if you have a master agreement, we've connected it with amendments, with statements of work, with order forms, and so forth. And we've extracted key data. So things like the effective date. We've extracted key clauses around limitations of liability and so forth. I will add here that this data extraction piece is critical to this, and it's an area of active development. So we're not done yet on this front. We're past the starting gate, but there's still a ways to go. But of course, we're super excited about what we're doing and how we're pushing the limits of large language models and other machine learning tools to be able to do this rapidly and accurately.
Wow, I'm practically speechless, Martin. Because I mean, what you're describing is you can go from, let's say, 6 months to less than a week, 3 days even, to get those documents operational so that you can get to work. And everybody wants to get to work, especially if you've really like put down on the table a very large chunk of change on some software, and you can't even see the benefits of it for months. You make it immediate practically.
Correct.
I'm not going to ask you to share the secret formula, but I would imagine just from the broad stuff that I know about generative AI is that it's really, really good at taking unstructured, messy data and organizing it. So it seems like really fit to purpose. The timing's perfect, that you can enable that process of organizing those files. Essentially, what you're doing is you're miniaturizing a file clerk into a little piece of code that's running around on people's computers and organizing it all.
Yeah, I want to be careful about running around on people's computers because that gets lawyers backs up. But yeah, the analogy is correct.
Yeah.
We obviously deal with security and privacy in a way that we reassure not only legal departments, but also corporate IT and compliance.
And just let me ask you real quick, since it's top of mind, is like, and how do you do that? Like just like real high level, like what are some of the things you do to do that?
On the security front,
Yeah, on the security front.
there's several layers. So there's the pure technical and security measures. We're at least at the level of the best industry practices around the security at the transport layer and encryption both at the transport and the storage layer. We host on Amazon Web Services, which is one of the most reputable services providers, and we layer in certifications. So we have our SOC 2 certification and another certification. And finally, there's a contractual layer where we stand behind our security and our obligations.
Wow, it's really impressive. So I think like even right now there's CLM software that's, I'm not saying that yours is CLM specifically, but it's CLM adjacent software where they're still out there requiring this like preparation that takes months still even, right?
Correct. That's
Yeah.
one of the big barriers to actually getting value from CLMs in general. There's some other big pieces of work that need to be done typically for implementation around making sure your templates are updated and standardized, around making sure that your clause library is prepared and is digitized. Same thing for your playbook. Same thing for your workflows. And all of these things require not just a lot of work, but actually often a realization for legal departments and legal operations that there's a lot of preparation that needs to be done. It's not purely about the technology. It's a lot about the human and organizational process that has to be reviewed, adapted, discussed, approved, and all of that before it can be incorporated into technology like a CLM.
Absolutely. The change management is essential.
Yes. So one of the things that's unique about Recital is we avoid as much of that change management as possible because Recital works the way you already work. Keep using email, keep using Word.
So let's go sideways. The sideways question is just from this experience with Recital, like what's something you didn't expect that you learned in the process that kind of opened your eyes to things?
One thing is, as you know, there's a lot of excitement and activity around legal technology and around contract technology specifically right now, and AI is driving a lot of that. What that also means is there's a lot of noise in the market. So from a buyer perspective, a customer perspective, it can be really hard to understand what's available and what's the difference between all of these products on the market. The second thing is that as much as I think you're following my description of what Recital does and how it does it, we've gotten better and better at articulating what we do, but we have always found, and we still continue to find, that until people see it, they don't necessarily fully understand it or even believe that what Recital does is possible. So we've done a variety of things in terms of building awareness in the market to be able to show people, to be able to allow people to actually try out the product before they make a decision to buy, and that's proven very valuable.
Very cool stuff. But with the time we have left, I want to get to a couple of questions that I ask everyone. And the first one, we're a bit of type A's in terms of like doing a lot of work and keeping up, with everything and juggling a lot of stuff. For the benefit of people that are listening or watching, what do you do to keep it all up in the air? Like, how do you do because you guys so much going on. How do you do it?
Well, I think I will confess, and our team knows this as well, that we are probably not keeping all of the balls up in the air right now. So I'm stretched, our whole team is stretched right now, but we're very strong at prioritizing things and reprioritizing. So we prioritize and reprioritize obviously on a weekly basis, not just on a monthly or quarterly basis. Just that's for our stage of company, that's important. And even throughout the week, we're clear about saying this is the top one or the top two things for today, and focus on that. So speaking for myself personally, that's something that works well for me. It does require some mental energy, though, to let go of the things that don't make the top two or top three list. And so I struggle with this. I think most startup founders and executives struggle with this. Common to reach the end of my week where I got a lot done, and I'm pretty sure I got the right things done. But there were many things at the start of the week that were on my must-do list that are still not done. And
Yeah.
you have to be able to keep a bit of a smile on your face as you're doing that, because one of the things about being an entrepreneur and being building something important is you can't do everything at once, and you've got to be able to both see all the progress that you're making and also be able to deal with the setbacks that you have. And you have to be able to hold all of that in your head at the same time.
Well, and related to that, the last question that I have is, at the end of the day, after doing all that, what makes it worthwhile for you? Like, what is the thing that you come back to that makes you feel good about what you're doing and keep going?
Yeah, that probably varies a little bit from time to time, but I can tell you what the answer is at this time, like this week. I am really excited about some of the opportunities that we have with some prospects and some customers right now, where some of the things that you and I have just talked about are really resonating for them. So making sure that we're providing them with everything they need to spread the word on their team is super exciting and really, really motivating. Right? It's fantastic when you have somebody who's using your product. We're seeing that. It's also fantastic as we're now starting to see more and more people who are going, yeah, okay, let's do this.
That's fantastic. I'm really glad to hear that it's resonating with the market. That's cool. And I just want to thank you, Martin, for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
And thank you for having me. This has been a lot of fun. I've really appreciate it myself.
And for people that are watching, like how can they keep in touch with you and learn more about Recital?
We're easy to find on the web. I'm easy to find on the web. Our domain name is Recital App, RECITAL.app.com. And easy to get in touch with me via email, martin@recitalapp.com.
Well, fantastic. Definitely check out Recital. They're pretty awesome. And I really appreciate you sticking around, watching the show, and I'll see you next week. Thank you so much for watching the latest episode of the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. To keep in the loop about upcoming episodes, please subscribe to LawDroid Manifesto and you'll get notified. Thanks for watching. See you next time.